Albert Camus, November 7, 1913 to 4 January 1960, was a French philosopher, author, dramatist, journalist, and political activist. He was the recipient of the 1957 Nobel Prize in Literature at the age of 44, the second youngest recipient in history. His works include The Stranger, The Plague, The Myth of Sisyphus, The Fall, and The Rebel. Camus was born in French Algeria to Pieds Noirs parents. He spent his childhood in a poor neighborhood and later studied philosophy at the University of Algiers. He was in Paris when the Germans invaded France during World War II in 1940. Camus tried to flee but finally joined the French resistance, where he served as editor-in-chief at Combat, an outlawed newspaper. After the war, he was a celebrity figure and gave many lectures around the world. Here are some of his most famous quotes. "I know of only one duty, and that is to love. You cannot create experience. You must undergo it. Man is the only creature that refuses to be what he is. As soon as one does not kill oneself, one must keep silent about life. But above all, in order to be, never try to seem. The evil that is in the world always comes of ignorance, and good intentions may do as much harm as malevolence, if they lack understanding. But what is happiness except the simple harmony between a man and the life he leads? People hasten to judge in order not to be judged themselves. It is the job of thinking people not to be on the side of the executioners. You will never be happy if you continue to search for what happiness consists of. You will never live if you are looking for the meaning of life. There is no shame in preferring happiness. The slave begins by demanding justice and ends by wanting to wear a crown. Fiction is the lie through which we tell the truth. All great deeds and all great thoughts have a ridiculous beginning. It takes time to live. Like any work of art, life needs to be thought about. Life is the sum of your choices. Seeking what is true is not seeking what is desirable. Without work, all life goes rotten. But when work is soulless, life stifles and dies. Idleness is fatal only to the mediocre. We all have a weakness for beauty. No one who lives in the sunlight of gratitude that things aren't worse makes a failure of his or her life. That is love, to give away everything, to sacrifice everything, without the slightest desire to get anything in return. Point 3. Some people talk in their sleep. Lecturers talk while other people sleep. The only real progress lies in learning to be wrong all alone. I don't want to be a genius. I have enough problems just trying to be a man. Life is meaningless, but worth living, provided you recognize it's meaningless. The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. Don't walk behind me, I may not lead. Don't walk in front of me, I may not follow. Just walk beside me and be my friend. Sometimes, carrying on, just carrying on, is the superhuman achievement. Life is a sum of all your choices. So, what are you doing today? Nobody realizes that some people expend tremendous energy merely to be normal. Whoever gives nothing, has nothing. The greatest misfortune is not to be unloved, but not to love. Always go too far, because that's where you'll find the truth. You will never be able to experience everything. So, please, do poetical justice to your soul and simply experience yourself. There is no sun without shadow, and it is essential to know the night. The realization that life is absurd cannot be an end, but only a beginning. There are causes worth dying for, but none worth killing for. The four conditions of happiness: life in the open air, love for another being, freedom from ambition, creation. Those who lack the courage will always find a philosophy to justify it. You will never live if you are looking for the meaning of life. To grow old is to pass from passion to compassion. I rebel, therefore I exist. The welfare of the people in particular has always been the alibi of tyrants. Where there is no hope, we must invent it. Should I kill myself, or have a cup of coffee? The need to be right is the sign of a vulgar mind. Blessed are the hearts that can bend, they shall never be broken. The most important thing you do every day you live is deciding not to kill yourself. Whatever prevents you from doing your work has become your work. I am too far away from what I love and my distance is without remedy. The greatness of man lies in his decision to be stronger than his condition. Humans are creatures who spent their lives trying to convince themselves that their existence is not absurd. If we understood the enigmas of life, there would be no need for art. A man is more a man through the things he keeps to himself than through those he says. Yes, everything is simple. It's people who complicate things. You always get exaggerated notions of things you don't know anything about. There always comes a time when one must choose between contemplation and action. This is called becoming a man. Nothing is more despicable than respect based on fear. Real generosity toward the future lies in giving all to the present. Freedom is not constituted primarily of privileges but of responsibilities. We do not know how to eliminate evil, but we do know how to feed some of the hungry and heal some of the infirmed. Democracy is not the law of the majority but the protection of the minority. Integrity needs no rules. One recognizes one's course by discovering the paths that stray from it. In the depths of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer. The most knowledgeable person in one domain may be the most ignorant in another. When the soul suffers too much, it develops a taste for misfortune. Find your happiness in yourself. It is necessary to fall in love, if only to provide an alibi for all the random despair you are going to feel anyway. There is a life and there is a death, and there are beauty and melancholy between. Having money is a way of being free of money. What is a rebel? A man who says no. After a while you could get used to anything. Absolute justice is achieved by the suppression of all contradiction, therefore it destroys freedom. The society based on production is only productive, not creative. The real 19th century prophet was Dostoevsky, not Karl Marx. Myths are made for the imagination to breathe life into them. The innocent is the person who explains nothing. Stupidity has a knack of getting its way. Capital punishment is the most premeditated of murders. Madness such as this, it's like trying to stop a fire with the moisture from a kiss. Truth, like light, is blinding. Lies, on the other hand, are a beautiful dusk, which enhances the value of each object. He who despairs of the human condition is a coward, but he who has hope for it is a fool. Everything considered, a determined soul will always manage. Forever I shall be a stranger to myself. In psychology as in logic, there are truths but no truth. One always has exaggerated ideas about what one doesn't know. Freedom is not a reward or a decoration that is celebrated with champagne, oh no. It's a long-distance race, quite solitary and very exhausting. Life should be lived to the point of tears. If something is going to happen to me, I want to be there. It's better to bet on this life than on the next. Peace is the only battle worth waging. Again and again there comes a time in history when the man who dares to say that 2 and 2 make 4 is punished with death. The plague. Who taught you all this, doctor? The reply came promptly, suffering. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy. Integrity has no need of rules. Perhaps we cannot prevent this world from being a world in which children are tortured. But we can reduce the number of tortured children. I had the whole sky in my eyes and it was blue and gold. We get into the habit of living before acquiring the habit of thinking. I do not want to found anything on the incomprehensible. I want to know whether I can live with what I know and with that alone. From the evening breeze to this hand on my shoulder, everything has its truth. I looked up at the mass of signs and stars in the night sky and laid myself open for the first time to the benign indifference of the world. Je pousse near unchose sans me croire obliged à la salir au lieu de retirer aux autres le droit d'y croire. When there is no hope, one must invent hope. And never have I felt so deeply at one and the same time so detached from myself and so present in the world. I do not believe in God and I am not an atheist. One must place one's principles in big things. For the small, graciousness will suffice. Healthy people have a natural skill of avoiding feverish eyes. Truth, like light, blinds. Falsehood, on the contrary, is a beautiful twilight that enhances every object. There is scarcely any passion without struggle. The habit of despair is worse than despair itself. Love is the kind of illness that does not spare the intelligent or the dull. To be happy, we must not be too concerned with others. Like great works, deep feelings always mean more than they are conscious of saying. We turn toward God only to obtain the impossible. If God did not exist, we should have to invent him. If God did exist, we should have to abolish him. Still, obviously, one can't be sensible all the time. To know oneself, one should assert oneself. If we believe in nothing, if nothing has any meaning, and if we can affirm no values whatsoever, then everything is possible and nothing has any importance. Does the end justify the means? That is possible. But what will justify the end? To that question, which historical thought leaves pending, rebellion replies, the means. In order to exist just once in the world, it is necessary never again to exist. I know simply that the sky will last longer than I. If it adapts itself to what the majority of our society wants, art will be a meaningless recreation. The purpose of a writer is to keep civilization from destroying itself. Freedom is the right to never have to lie. Autumn is a second spring when every leaf is a flower. No matter what cause one defends, it will suffer permanent disgrace if one resorts to blind attacks on crowds of innocent people. We have art in order not to die of life. Imagination offers people consolation for what they cannot be, and humor for what they actually are. Note, besides, that it is no more immoral to directly rob citizens than to slip indirect taxes into the price of goods that they cannot do without. There is a solitude in poverty, but a solitude which restores to each thing its value. If those whom we begin to love could know us as we were before meeting them, they could perceive what they have made of us. Nothing in the world is worth turning one's back on what one loves. You have to be very rich or very poor to live without a trade. Charm is a way of getting the answer, yes, without asking a clear question. Retaliation is related to nature and instinct, not to law. Law, by definition, cannot obey the same rules as nature. The harshest winter finds an invincible summer in us. When I look at my life and its secret colors, I feel like bursting into tears. Don't wait for the last judgment, it takes place every day. Those who prefer their principles over their happiness, they refuse to be happy outside the conditions they seem to have attached to their happiness. Alas, after a certain age every man is responsible for his face. A loveless world is a dead world. That's love, giving everything, sacrificing all without hope of return. We need the sweet pain of anticipation to tell us we are really alive. Freedom is nothing but a chance to be better. The important thing isn't the soundness or otherwise of the argument, but for it to make you think. Beginning to think is beginning to be undermined. Women are all we know of paradise on this earth. Too many have dispensed with generosity in order to practice charity. An achievement is a bondage. It obliges one to a higher achievement. Liberty is the right not to lie. There is no love of life without despair of life. We call first truths those we discover after all the others. When the body is sad, the heart languishes. The mind's deepest desire, even in its most elaborate operations, parallels man's unconscious feeling in the face of his universe. It is an insistence upon familiarity, an appetite for clarity. The work of art is born of the intelligence's refusal to reason the concrete. It marks the triumph of the carnal. Your successes and happiness are forgiven you only if you generously consent to share them. Every act of rebellion expresses a nostalgia for innocence and an appeal to the essence of being. Beauty is unbearable, drives us to despair, offering us for a minute the glimpse of an eternity that we should like to stretch out over the whole of time. A symbol always transcends the one who makes use of it and makes him say in reality more than he is aware of expressing. An intellectual is someone whose mind watches itself. I know that man is capable of great deeds. But if he isn't capable of great emotion, well, he leaves me cold. The urge to revolt is one of the essential dimensions of human nature. Morality, when formal, devours. Art does not tolerate reason. Only it takes time to be happy. A lot of time. Happiness, too, is a long patience. Yes, and when the love of life disappears, no meaning can console us. It is a well-known fact that we always recognize our homeland at the moment we are about to lose it. A lot of jobs don't allow you to be who you are. There is dignity in work only when it is work freely accepted. Greatness consists in trying to be great. There is no other way. The most exhausting effort in my life has been to suppress my own nature in order to make it serve my biggest plans. If nothing had any meaning, you would be right. But there is something that still has a meaning. Nothing in life is worth turning your back on, if you love it. If, after all, men cannot always make history have a meaning, they can always act so that their own lives have one. We used to wonder where war lived, what it was that made it so vile. And now we realize that we know where it lives, inside ourselves. Beauty, no doubt, does not make revolutions. But a day will come when revolutions will have need of beauty. I had only a little time left and I didn't want to waste it on God. Thinking is learning all over again how to see, directing one's consciousness, making of every image a privileged place. It is better to burn than to disappear. We are all special cases. In order to exist, men must rebel. In order to understand the world, one has to turn away from it on occasion. We always deceive ourselves twice about the people we love, first to their advantage, then to their disadvantage. A nihilist is not one who believes in nothing, but one who does not believe in what exists. I opened myself to the gentle indifference of the world. Purely historical thought is therefore nihilistic. It wholeheartedly accepts the evil of history and in this way is opposed to rebellion. The act of love is a confession. No ends, simply means. Man cannot do without beauty, and this is what our era pretends to want to disregard. I make myself strict rules in order to correct my nature. But it is my nature that I finally obey. The truth is that everyone is bored, and devotes himself to cultivating habits. A man without ethics is a wild beast loosed upon this world. Men cry because things are not what they ought to be. Give up the tyranny of female charm. As a remedy to life in society, I would suggest the big city. Nowadays, it is the only desert within our means. Revolt and revolution both wind up at the same crossroads, the police, or folly. Fancy language, like poplin, too often conceals an eczema. Sometimes at night I would sleep open-eyed underneath a sky dripping with stars. I was alive then. If Nietzsche is correct, that to shame a man is to kill him, then any honest attempt at autobiography will be an act of self-destruction. There can be no true goodness, nor true love, without the utmost clear-sightedness. The laws of nature may be operative up to a certain limit, beyond which they turn against themselves to give birth to the absurd. Truth and freedom, having few lovers, are demanding mistresses. To feel absolutely right is the beginning of the end. To live is in itself a value judgment. To breathe is to judge. For rich people, the sky is just an extra, a gift of nature. The poor, on the other hand, can see it as it is, a gift of infinite grace. We're all special cases. Old married people look so much alike that they have the same number of hairs in their ears. The only really committed artist is he who, without refusing to take part in the combat, at least refuses to join the regular armies and remains a freelance. There are people who vindicate the world, who help others live just by their presence. I understood, by dint of digging into my memories, that modesty helped me to shine, humility helped me to triumph, and virtue to oppress. How do you put everyone in the pool, so you have the right to dry yourself in the sun? Don't believe your friends when they ask you to be honest with them. All they really want is to be maintained in the good opinion they have of themselves. Do not wait for the last judgment. It takes place every day. To govern means to pillage, as everyone knows. It is not true that the heart wears out, but the body creates this illusion. The best revenge you can have on intellectuals is to be madly happy. You must have a love, a great love, to ensure an alibi at unjustified despairs that conquer all of us. The absurd hero's refusal to hope becomes his singular ability to live in the present with passion. Maman used to say that you can always find something to be happy about. Freedom is not a gift received from the state or leader, but a possession to be won every day by the effort of each and the union of all. None of the evils which totalitarianism claims to remedy is worse than totalitarianism itself. What would become of the world if the condemned started to confide their heartaches to the executioners? A guilty conscience needs to confess. A work of art is a confession. Life can be magnificent and overwhelming, that is the whole tragedy. Without beauty, love, or danger it would almost be easy to live. Travel, which is like a greater and a graver science, brings us back to ourselves. What's true of all the evils in the world is true of plague as well. It helps men to rise above themselves. On the ridge where the great artist moves forward, every step is an adventure, an extreme risk. In that risk, however, and only there, lays the freedom of art. We have to live and let live in order to create what we are. Violence is both unavoidable and unjustifiable. Believe me, the hardest thing for a man to give up is that which he really doesn't want, after all. Of course, true love is exceptional, 2 or 3 times a century, more or less. The rest of the time there is vanity or boredom. My life was lucky so that I met, I loved, and disappointed, only outstanding people. Every great work makes the human face more admirable and richer, and this is its whole secret. Even when one sits in the prisoner's dock, it is interesting to hear talk about oneself. To lose the touch of flowers and women's hands is the supreme separation. Thoughts of suicide have got me through many a bad night. I am too much in love with my lies and hypocrisies not to confess them fervently. I cling like a miser to the freedom that disappears as soon as there is an excess of things. I have no idea what's awaiting me, or what will happen when this all ends. For the moment I know this, there are sick people and they need curing. In the end, we would like not to be guilty while at the same time being dispensed of the effort of purifying ourselves. Not enough cynicism and not enough virtue. I was born poor and without religion, under a happy sky, feeling harmony, not hostility, in nature. I began not by feeling torn, but in plenitude. Happiness too is inevitable. It's a kind of spiritual snobbery that makes people think they can be happy without money. Every ideology is contrary to human psychology. Somebody has to have the last word. If not, every argument could be opposed by another and we'd never be done with it. The desire for possession is insatiable, to such a point that it can survive even love itself. To love, therefore, is to sterilize the person one loves. It is not humiliating to be unhappy. Physical suffering is sometimes humiliating, but the suffering of being cannot be. It is life. But who would dare condemn me in this world with no judges, where no one is innocent? I was assailed by memories of a life that wasn't mine anymore, but one in which I'd found the simplest and most lasting joys. Liberty is dangerous, as hard to get along with as it is exciting. Cruel irony. The poor man tormented with hunger feeds those who plead his case. Martyrs, my friend, have to choose between being forgotten, mocked, or used. As for being understood, never. Being is good, but getting rich is better. If the gods had only the riches of men's adoration, they would be as poor Caligula. There are people who prefer to look their fate in the eye. Have you no hope at all? And do you really live with the thought that when you die, and nothing remains? Yes, I said. Unhappiness is like marriage. We believe we chose it, but then it is choosing us. That is how it is, we can do nothing about it. The only serious question in life is whether to kill yourself or not. Happiness is generous. It does not subsist on destruction. The nobility of our calling will always be rooted in two commitments difficult to observe: refusal to lie about what we know, and resistance to oppression. There are always reasons for murdering a man. But there is no justification for his existence. Rebellion cannot exist without the feeling that somewhere, in some way, you are justified. I enjoyed my own nature to the fullest, and we all know there lies happiness, although, to soothe one another mutually, we occasionally pretend to condemn such joys as selfishness. The world in which we were called to exist was an absurd world, and there was no other in which we could take refuge. I felt as I hadn't felt for ages. I had a foolish desire to burst into tears. For the first time I'd realized how all these people loathe me. I like people who dream or talk to themselves interminably. I like them, for they are double. They are here and elsewhere. In our well-policed society, we recognize that an illness is serious from the fact that we don't dare speak of it directly. Men are convinced of your arguments, your sincerity, and the seriousness of your efforts only by your death. Heroism is accessible. Happiness is more difficult. Without freedom, no art. Art lives only on the restraints it imposes on itself, and dies of all others. But, you know, I feel more fellowship with the defeated than with saints. Heroism and sanctity don't really appeal to me, I imagine. What interests me is being a man. To abandon oneself to principles is really to die, and to die for an impossible love which is the contrary of love. The most elementary form of rebellion, paradoxically, expresses an aspiration for order. Nature is a burning and frigid, transparent and limited universe in which nothing is possible but everything is given. One dies if necessary, one breaks rather than bending. But I bend, because I continue to love myself. Nihilism is not only despair and negation, but above all the desire to despair and to negate. A free press can, of course, be good or bad, but, most certainly without freedom, the press will never be anything but bad. Happiness implied a choice, and within that choice a concerted will, a lucid desire. My chief occupation, despite appearances, has always been love. There is no more futile punishment than futile and hopeless labor. Against eternal injustice, man must assert justice, and to protest against the universe of grief, he must create happiness. Accepting the absurdity of everything around us is one step, a necessary experience. It should not become a dead end. It arouses a revolt that can become fruitful. Artistic creation is a demand for unity and a rejection of the world. History only exists, in the final analysis, for God. If the world were clear, art would not exist. It's not the struggle that makes us artists, but art that makes us struggle. We continue to shape our personality all our life. If we knew ourselves perfectly, we should die. There is no frontier between being and appearing. The true work of art is always on the human scale. It is essentially the one that says, less. No matter how the sun shone, the sea held forth no more promises. To create today is to create dangerously. Any publication is an act, and that act exposes one to the passions of an age that forgives nothing. I know myself too well to believe in pure virtue. Art and revolt will die only with the last man. I grew up with the sea, and poverty for me was sumptuous. Then I lost the sea and found all luxuries gray and poverty unbearable. Great novelists are philosopher novelists, that is, the contrary of thesis writers. A taste for truth at any cost is a passion which spares nothing. I'd have given 10 conversations with Einstein for a first meeting with a pretty chorus girl. He was conscious of the disastrous fact that love and desire must be expressed in the same way. At the heart of all beauty lies something inhuman. The best are led to make greater demands upon themselves. As for those who succumb, they did not deserve to survive. Proof is never definitive. After all, one has to begin again with each new person. All great deeds and all great thoughts have a ridiculous beginning. Great works are often born on a street corner or in a restaurant's revolving door. True debauchery is liberating because it creates no obligations. In it you possess only yourself, hence it remains the favorite pastime of the great lovers of their own person. The loss of love is the loss of all rights, even though one had them all. We spend our days in deliberating, and we end them without coming to any resolve. Camus himself described this work as an attempt to understand the time I live in. I sometimes need to write things which I cannot completely control but which therefore prove that what is in me is stronger than I am. There is nothing abstract about pain. It is specific, it is real, and, when it is intense, it is world-destroying. Those who write clearly have readers. All healthy men have thought of their own suicide. Every revolutionary ends up either by becoming an oppressor or a heretic. For there is merely bad luck in not being loved, there is misfortune in not loving. I would like to be able to breathe, to be able to love her by memory or fidelity. But my heart aches. I love you continuously, intensely. Happiness and the absurd are two sons of the same earth. They are inseparable. The absurd is essentially a divorce. It lies in neither of the elements compared, it is born of their confrontation. To ensure the adoration of a theorem for any length of time, faith is not enough, a police force is needed as well. To create is likewise to give a shape to one's fate. I lived with the only continuity, day to day, of the me. A man devoid of hope and conscious of being so has ceased to belong to the future. Between history and the eternal I have chosen history because I like certainties. Of it, at least, I am certain, and how can I deny this force crushing me? In a world that has ceased to believe in sin, the artist is responsible for the preaching. In art, rebellion is consummated and perpetuated in the act of real creation, not in criticism or commentary. It is in the thick of calamity that one gets hardened to the truth, in other words, to silence. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. We're going forward, but nothing changes. To remain a man in today's world, one must have not only unfailing energy and unwavering intensity, one must also have a little luck. In the world there is, parallel to the force of death and constraint, an enormous force of persuasion that is called culture. Rule: start by looking for what is valid in every man. It is always easy to be logical. It is almost impossible to be logical to the bitter end. What is a rebel? A man who says no, but whose refusal does not imply a renunciation. I may not have been sure about what really did interest me, but I was absolutely sure about what didn't. Intelligence in chains loses in lucidity what it gains in intensity. But sometimes it takes more courage to live than to shoot yourself. By definition, a government has no conscience. Sometimes it has a policy, but nothing more. But in the end one needs more courage to live than to kill himself. If absolute truth belongs to anyone in this world, it certainly does not belong to the man or party that claims to possess it. Obstinacy alone is not a virtue. Truth is not a virtue, but a passion. It is never charitable. If the descent is thus sometimes performed in sorrow, it can also take place in joy. Today we are always as ready to judge as we are to fornicate. Instead of killing and dying in order to produce the being that we are not, We have to live and let live in order to create what we are. What I believe to be true I must therefore preserve. What seems to me so obvious, even against me, I must support. I have never been able to renounce the light, the pleasure of being, and the freedom in which I grew up. Why should it be essential to love rarely in order to love much? No code of ethics and no effort are justifiable a priori in the face of the cruel mathematics that command our condition. Fate is not in man but around him. He had opened his heart to the sublime indifference of the universe. A novel is never anything but a philosophy expressed in images. And in a good novel the philosophy has disappeared into the images. All men have a sweetness in their life. That is what helps them go on. It is towards that they turn when they feel too worn out. There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. The absurd is the essential concept and the first truth. Liberty is a corand, a long-distance race, quite solitary, quite exhausting. Ah, mon cher, for anyone who is alone, without God and without a master, the weight of days is dreadful. I felt as though I was partly unlearning what I had never learned and yet knew so well, I mean, how to live. I draw from the absurd three consequences: my revolt, my liberty, my passion. Culture, the cry of men in face of their destiny. Thinking of the future, establishing aims for oneself, having preferences, all this presupposes a belief in freedom, even if one occasionally ascertains that one doesn't feel it. In order to be created, a work of art must first make use of the dark forces of the soul. Men must live and create. Live to the point of tears. I love life, that's my real weakness. I love it so much that I am incapable of imagining what is not life. Any country where I am not bored is a country that teaches me nothing. False judges are held up in the world's admiration, and I alone know the true ones. They hurt each other without wanting to, just because each represented to the others the cruel and demanding necessity of their lives. Where there is no hope, it is incumbent on us to invent it. I was comfortable in all, I admit, but at the same time, nothing satisfied me. Each joy made me seek another. Men who have greatness within them don't go in for politics. The current motto for all of us can only be this: without giving up anything on the plane of justice, yield nothing on the plane of freedom. Their guilt made me eloquent because I was not its victim. We must learn how to lend ourselves to dreaming when dreams lend themselves to us. There is only one class of men, the privileged class.